The Dutton Ranch finale didn't just end the season, it completely changed the future of the series. Just when it looked like Rip and Beth had finally exposed the truth behind the ranch, everything came crashing down in a matter of minutes. A shocking kidnapping, brutal betrayals, major character deaths, and one final phone call that changed everything. But the biggest question isn't who survived. It's how far Rip and Beth are willing to go now that the people they love have become targets. Because after this ending, there's no turning back. So, let's break down everything that happened in Dutton Ranch Episode 9, explain that explosive ending, and talk about what it means for Season 2. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers, right from the opening moments. This episode wastes absolutely no time in raising the stakes. Throughout the entire season, there had been hints that something much bigger was happening behind the scenes at Temple Ranch. We knew that several characters were hiding secrets, but nobody truly expected the operation to be as dangerous as it turned out to be. Once Rip and Beth discovered that the cattle were being used to transport narcotics across the border, everything immediately changed. Up until this point, they believed they had simply inherited a struggling ranch that needed rebuilding. Instead, they found themselves standing in the middle of a criminal operation that had been running for years. That revelation completely shifted the direction of the finale because this was no longer just about protecting land or saving the ranch. It suddenly became about survival. Rip immediately understood that once people making millions of dollars from this operation realized they had been exposed, they weren't just going to walk away quietly. Someone was always going to end up paying the price. One thing I really liked about this episode was how naturally Rip reacted to the situation. Throughout the season, we've seen him stay calm no matter what was thrown at him, and once again he proved why he's such a dangerous person to underestimate. Rather than panic after learning the truth, he immediately started thinking several steps ahead. Beth, on the other hand, looked genuinely devastated. She wasn't angry simply because someone had lied to her. She was angry because she'd unknowingly put herself and Rip directly in the middle of something they never agreed to be part of. The trust that had slowly been built throughout the season completely disappeared within minutes. You could see on Beth's face that every conversation she'd previously had with Bueller suddenly meant something completely different. Every promise that had been made now felt like manipulation. The most interesting part is that Bueller herself didn't exactly come across as someone who enjoyed living this life. Instead, she looked like somebody who had spent years trapped inside a situation she could never escape. That's what makes the writing here much stronger than simply creating another evil villain. Rather than making everything black and white, the finale shows how years of bad decisions slowly trapped multiple generations inside the same cycle. Bueller may have kept the operation alive, but at the same time it also felt like she believed there was never another option available. Whether that's enough to forgive her is another question entirely, but it definitely makes her character more interesting going forward. Meanwhile, the episode also continued building tension around Carter, and honestly, this has probably been the most frustrating storyline of the entire season. Ever since he started pulling away from Beth and Rip, every decision he made seemed to create even more problems for himself. Instead of appreciating everything they'd done for him, he constantly ignored their advice and acted as though nobody understood him. Even when Beth repeatedly tried calling him, he refused to answer. That might not seem important at first, but the writers were clearly setting something up. Every ignored phone call slowly increased the feeling that something terrible was about to happen. The audience could almost sense it before the characters did. His relationship with Oriana only made matters even more complicated. Carter convinced himself that running away would solve all of his problems. Instead of facing reality, he chose the easier option. Throughout the episode, he acted like leaving everything behind would somehow give him a fresh start, but the finale reminds us that actions always have consequences. While Carter believed he was escaping his old life, someone else had already been watching him. That's what makes this sequence work so well. The audience knows danger is getting closer, but Carter remains completely unaware of what's coming. It creates constant tension because every passing minute feels like it's building towards something much darker. At the same time, the people behind the criminal operation were already preparing their response. After losing control of the ranch, they couldn't allow Rip and Beth to expose everything they'd built over the last 15 years. Money, power, and reputation were all on the line. Once people reach that level of desperation, they're willing to do almost anything to protect themselves. That's exactly what makes Mariano such a dangerous antagonist. Unlike many villains who rely purely on violence, Mariano remains patient. He studies people before making his move. He understands exactly where to attack in order to cause the most damage. Rather than immediately going after Rip and Beth themselves, he starts thinking about what matters most to them. And that's exactly where this finale begins, setting up its biggest twist. By the end of the first act, it becomes clear that exposing the truth wasn't actually the biggest victory. In reality, it was the beginning of a much larger war. Rip and Beth may have survived the first battle, but the people they're fighting have far more resources, far more experience, and absolutely nothing left to lose. And as the episode continues, they're about to discover that winning one fight sometimes creates an even bigger problem than losing one. As the episode continues, this is where everything starts to spiral completely out of control. Up until this point, Rip and Beth believed that exposing the truth about the ranch was the biggest challenge they were going to face. They knew there would be consequences, but I don't think either of them expected those consequences to arrive so quickly. That's what made this part of the finale so effective. There wasn't a long build-up before the danger arrived. Instead, the episode kept increasing the tension until it finally exploded. Meanwhile, Carter was still completely focused on his own plans. Throughout the season, we've watched him slowly drift away from Beth and Rip. Rather than seeing them as people trying to help him, he started treating them like they were standing in the way of the life he wanted. His relationship with Oriana became the only thing he cared about, and because of that, he completely ignored every warning sign around him. Looking back now, it's clear that the writers were building towards this moment for several episodes. One thing that frustrated me was how many opportunities Carter had to avoid what happened. Beth called him more than once. Rip wanted to know where he was. Even Oriana hinted that something didn't feel right. Yet Carter continued believing that none of it mattered. Instead of simply telling Beth his location, he kept acting as though he didn't owe anyone an explanation. At the time, he probably thought he was proving his independence. But in reality, he was making himself the easiest target possible. That's exactly what Mariano had been waiting for. One thing that makes Mariano such a dangerous villain is that he doesn't rush into making emotional decisions. Unlike some characters who react with pure anger, Mariano always looks for the weakest point before making his move. After Rip and Beth ruined years of planning by uncovering the drug operation, killing them immediately would have been satisfying, but it wouldn't have hurt them enough. Mariano understood something that many villains don't. Sometimes emotional pain is far more powerful than physical pain. Instead of attacking Rip and Beth directly, he decided to attack the person they cared about most. When Carter heard the knock at the door, the episode did a brilliant job of making the audience believe that Oriana had arrived. Everything leading up to that moment suggested she was coming so the two of them could leave together. Carter himself had absolutely no reason to believe anything was wrong. That's what makes the scene work so well. The audience is expecting something bad to happen, but we're still hoping Carter manages to escape before it's too late. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. The second that door opened, everything changed within moments. Carter was overpowered and dragged away before he even had a chance to understand what was happening. There wasn't some long action sequence or dramatic speech. It was quick, violent, and efficient. That made it feel much more realistic. The people working for Mariano weren't there to send a message. They were there to complete a job, and they did exactly that. From Mariano's perspective, this was the perfect move. Rip and Beth had already shown that they weren't afraid to fight. Sending more men after them would only create more bodies. But taking Carter gave Mariano something much more valuable. He now controlled the one thing that could force Rip and Beth into making emotional decisions instead of smart ones.